Okay, happy Thursday, everybody. By now, it seems like you're all pros and you're already dropping your names in the chat for attendance. If you're just joining us today, make sure before you leave, you just put your name in the chat. That's how we take attendance for our boot camp. Um, Okay, happy Thursday. Today, the plan is we've covered standard English conventions, we covered words in context. Today, we're going to cover two of the smaller question categories on the SAT. So we have transition words to start with, and then we're going to move on to rhetorical synthesis after that. These two kind of on their own don't make up much of the SAT. Transition words, this one, the first one, only about like 8-ish%. There are some sections that don't even feature this kind of question. But 8% of the SAT can still be like the make or break between, say, like a 650 or a 700. So important to know. And then the next one, rhetorical synthesis, is about 10-ish, 11-ish%. So together about 20. But okay, transition words to start off with. What are we talking about here? With something like standard English conventions, words in context, the sort of skills you were accumulating over those lessons is still going to kind of come into play here. It's a combination of sort of flexing your reading comprehension muscles, looking for clues, and then kind of based on what you figure out about the sentences, kind of making the right, say, grammatical or context-wise choice from there. So the most important thing when it comes to transition word questions is determining the relationship between the ideas in your passage. There are kind of three, I would say, like primary types of relationships that show up in this type of question. So we have continue relationships. This one on the left here, continue. A continue relationship is when two ideas are related, maybe related in time, maybe related like conceptually, related ideas. One does not necessarily cause the other, because you'll notice cause and effect, but continue ideas are related or sequential. And then we have contrast here on the bottom, ideas that disagree with each other for one reason or another. And then we have a cause and effect relationship over on this side. Basically, one thing has to happen and then the other one can happen. The second thing cannot happen without the first thing, for example. So pretty simple when you just think of it like this. Transition words are basically or transition word questions are basically asking you to figure out the relationship between the information in the passage, and then from there make the most informed choice. Continue, contrast, and cause and effect are kind of the main types of things you'll be looking out for. So if it kind of helps you to have like very basic sort of like plug-in words or plug-in ideas for what these sorts of things mean, continue basically means and, this and that, right? Maybe and then, because sometimes continue is more about things happening one after the other, but continue relationship means an and relationship. A contrast relationship means a but relationship, and a cause and effect relationship means a because relationship. But what are the types of words that show up in each of these relationships? So under continue, you'll see options like also, additionally, indeed, moreover. That's kind of the and style of thing, right? This, also that, this, additionally, that, indeed, this and that, that sort of thing. Sometimes you'll have a relationship that is more of the for example or for instance variety, where it's a bit more specific than just saying this and that. It's more like this, for example, that, right? So you'll kind of see that show up as well. And then, like I mentioned, continue can be either and or and then. There's also sequence words where we have this, then that. Whereas with contrast, the but relationship, but, however, nevertheless, even though, although, while, yet, despite, these, like, there's a little bit less, I guess, nuance to this, right? When you see the continue list, there are kind of a couple of different, like, styles of continue, right? Something can be an example of something else, or something and something else can just happen at the same time, or one thing happens and then another thing happens. Whereas when something is contrasting, you can more or less use pretty much any of these words in any situation. However, and nevertheless, more or less do the same thing. Yet and even though more or less do the same thing. That kind of idea. Whereas cause and effect, you'll have words like consequently, because, thus, therefore, since, and so. I'll throw in actually one more for contrast. Sometimes you'll see still. But just like these are pretty much the types of words you'll see on this kind of question. And like I mentioned, it can help sometimes to have like little plug-in options where you're like, okay, I think it's a continual relationship, but just to check my work, I'll throw the word and into this blank, see if it checks out, and then from there make the choice I need to make with my with the multiple choice options available to me. The most kind of obvious sort of plug-in for cause and effect would be because of this or because. So, come prepared with whatever word makes the most sense for you to be like, okay, I think it's a cause and effect relationship. Let me just plug in because of this, and if it makes sense, I'll go forward with my answer. But let's look at some example sort of statements and then, actually put this process into action. So I'm gonna break down this sentence and then we can break down the next couple together. So let's say this is a passage we're working with on the SAT. And it says, in the past, coffees were blended to suit a generic popular taste, blank. Many different coffee flavors are now being produced. What do I look for to determine relationship? So reading through this first sentence, it seems like the kind of idea here is that back in the day, there was really only like one coffee flavor. They would put all the coffees together to make like a generic taste, a generic flavor. Okay. The next sentence says many different coffee flavors are now being produced. And kind of my immediate reaction to that is, oh, okay, so something different is happening now than what used to be happening, which gives me an idea that we're talking about a contrast relationship because the two ideas are saying more or less different things. It used to be that there was really only one coffee flavor because everything was blended together, and now there are different coffee flavors. So two different ideas. It can be that simple. So, based on the fact that we're looking at a contrast relationship, look at these answer choices and let me know which one makes sense to you. So you can drop just your answer choice in the chat. And as always, if it makes me more comfortable, you can also private message me your answer if you don't want to drop it to everybody. But I'm seeing some B's in the chat. Awesome. This is kind of like, the ground floor of this kind of idea. You read through the sentences, make sure you understand what they're saying, compare the ideas. Do they sound different? Do they sound similar? Does one cause the other? In this case, these are just different ideas. So you'd say, however, right? In the past, it used to be like this, but it is like this now. So there you go. Let's look at this one together. So, blank, researchers are unable to drill into the Earth's core. Its chemical composition remains a mystery. Give this sentence a read and drop in the chat what kind of relationship you think is going on here. Is this a continue, a contrast, or a cause and effect? Blank, researchers are unable to drill into the Earth's core. Its chemical composition remains a mystery. Cool, cool. Awesome. Seeing some cause and effects in the chat. Nice. So in this case, right? Um, we understand it's a mystery. Why would it be a mystery? Oh, it'd be a mystery. And then let's say this word because goes here. Because. Oh, why is it a mystery? It's a mystery because researchers are unable to drill into the Earth's core. That is a huge signal that we're working with cause and effect. So we don't have the word because down here in our answer choices, but because works. So what's the closest thing to because in our multiple choice here? Cool. Seeing a lot of sinces, and yeah, in this case, that's what you need. Since is basically the same thing as because. So, since because works, since is our correct answer. And a little tip I'll kind of offer here. Maybe let me look at let me look at this one for that. Okay, so I mentioned that there are like a bunch of options for each relationship that kind of do the same thing, right? So in this case, let's say we're looking at this answer choice. We have these four options available to us: moreover, however, additionally, and thus. You might notice that moreover and additionally kind of do the same thing. Like there's really no reason you'd pick one over the other. So if you're looking at your answer choices and you see things that are more or less equal to each other, you can immediately eliminate them and just move on from there. So there's no real reason to say moreover, over, additionally. They kind of do the same thing. So if you see both of them in your multiple choice options, you can eliminate anything that's, synonymous with the other one. So let's look at one more example and then kind of put this into kind of ramp up the complexity and look at real SAT questions. So this is another sample question. The Taj Mahal is regarded as one of the eight wonders of the world, blank. Some people believe that its architectural beauty has never been surpassed. So let me know in the chat what type of relationship you think this is. Continue, contrast, or cause and effect. So seeing a decent amount of continues in the chat. So in this case, we're working with a continue relationship, right? These are related ideas. And based on this thought process, what gives us what we need out of our answer choices? We have on the other hand, yet, indeed, or however. Awesome. So based on these, in this case, we would want indeed. And sort of like I mentioned a little bit earlier about if you see multiple answer choices that are doing the same thing, in this case, we have on the other hand, yet and however, which are all kind of going for the same contrast relationship. So just as a reminder, if you see multiple words doing the same thing in your multiple choice options, you can eliminate them. Okay, so these were kind of like more simple takes on how this kind of thing will work. So like let's look at some real SAT questions and make sure we're feeling okay with these. So I'll work through this one and then we can work through the next couple ones together. So this one says, Iraqi artist Nazik al-Malika, celebrated as the first Arabic poet to write in free verse, didn't reject traditional forms entirely. Her poem, Elegy for a Woman of No Importance, consists of two 10-line stanzas and a standard number of syllables. Even in this superficially traditional work, blank, Al-Malika is breaking new ground by memorializing an anonymous woman rather than a famous man. So step one is always just making sure you understand what's being said and then working with the relationship from there. So it sounds like this first sentence is saying that we have this poet, and she kind of broke new ground in a formal way by like not necessarily inventing free verse, but being the first, at least Arabic language poet to write in free verse. So it sounds like she was sort of ahead of her time. But even though she did this, she still embraced, like in her poem Elegy for a Woman of No Importance, she still embraced kind of traditional form, right? So this next sentence, even in the superficially work, so kind of this phrase, even in the superficially traditional work, is sort of suggesting that the thing we're talking about seems like it's not doing anything that crazy or that experimental, but then everything after the blank is still saying that actually it did do something pretty new and pretty important. It still broke some kind of mold. So that sounds to me like a contrast relationship is going on, right? Because it's talking about, well, we might think that a formal piece of writing won't really do anything that interesting. However, this piece still broke new ground. So that's kind of how I get contrast out of this. So we look at our answer choices. We see, in fact, that's more of a continue. We see therefore, and we see moreover. So I'm thinking it's probably though. Even in the superficially traditional work, though, Amalika was breaking new ground by memorializing an anonymous woman rather than a famous man. So though is what we're going for here, because the two ideas kind of contradict. The though kind of expresses that contradiction. The kind of trick here sometimes is if you're looking at these answer choices and you start to plug them in, a word like a phrase like in fact might kind of work if you just hear it, but it's kind of like those words in context style of questions where it's more about figuring out how do the clues, like how does this sort of how do the clues in this passage help me pick the answer choice that is quote unquote most logical. So just because in fact would work, though is the one that is connected most to that idea of, well, even though this, really that. Okay, so let's try a few of these together. So we have this next one. I'll give it a read and then we can break it down. O2 Arena, an award-winning science fiction story by Nigerian author Ogenechevwe Donald Ekpeki, takes place in an alternate version of Nigeria where breathable air is a rare commodity that is owned and sold by companies. Blank, people must purchase it with currency called O2 credits. So in this case, we only have two sentences, one kind of long one, setting up this idea or this kind of fictional world, and then we have this second one is kind of expanding on that. Give this one a read and let me know what type of relationship you feel like is going on here. Are we working with a continue, a contrast, or a cause and effect? And if it helps your process a bit more, you can also be like, okay, well, I think it's not a blank relationship, and then work from there. All right, just take another quick second if you're still reading through it and trying to form your answer. All right. So this is actually a situation that I think kind of doing the plug-in method, as in like having a phrase or this particular word that you're like, I'm gonna just use this if I think it's a blank relationship. In this case, let's say we use because of this. Let's say that's our kind of like chosen plug-in phrase for a cause and effect relationship. If we throw in a because of this into this passage, because of this, people must purchase it with currency called O2 credits. That sounds good to me, right? And if we kind of commit to this being a cause effect relationship, as a result, like I'm seeing in the chat, ends up being the best fit. And that is correct. Um, so if that's the kind of process that helps you feel like you can kind of cut to the chase a bit more quickly, just by having like, okay, if I think it's a cause and effect relationship, I'm just going to plug in the phrase because of this, and then if that works, I just lock in and pick the one that is essentially because. So that's another one. All right, I'm going to skip this one, and I'm going to go to this one. Okay. It has long been thought that humans first crossed a land bridge into the Americas approximately 13,000 years ago. Blank, based on radiocarbon dating of samples uncovered in Mexico, a research team recently suggested that humans may have arrived more than 30,000 years ago, much earlier than previously thought. So, in this case, another kind of two-sentence situation. So to give this one another reread and try to figure out what relationship is going on here. And then from there, let me know what answer you think it would be. Take another second to read through this and lock in your answer if you haven't already. Okay, so I think the biggest giveaway with this one is we have this number here, 13,000 years ago. We used to think this. And then the second sentence says, well, now we think this, 30,000 years ago, much earlier than previously thought. That kind of suggests we got two different ideas going on. Something has changed about our research. So one idea contrasts the other. And the best contrast choice in our multiple choice options is however. So, and that one is correct. Let's skip this one as well. Okay, so This one. Reforestation efforts, while undeniably valuable, often result in forests with limited biodiversity. Blank. Care should be taken to plant a wide variety of native flora in depleted woodlands. So another situation, we're working with two sentences we're trying to connect. So give this one a read and let me know in the chat what either relationship you think it is or which answer you think works. Take another quick second, read through it, and lock in your answer if you haven't already. Okay, this one's probably the hardest one we've looked at so far, and this is the kind of, I guess, trick they'll be playing with you where it seems like. So, part of the deceptive thing about this is that we have this limited biodiversity point, and then we have this wide variety point. It seems like those are different ideas, which can kind of lead us to think, okay, maybe contrast is what's going on here. Um, the thing is, when you have A and C, nevertheless, and however, in the answer choice together, there's really no reason to pick one over the other. They basically do the same thing. So that's kind of suggesting you should eliminate those first, and then from there be like, okay, it's either an accordingly or a furthermore, which means I'm either working with a continuous relationship or a cause and effect relationship. Cause and effect would be more B, and then continuous would be more D. Um, so when we're kind of thinking like, okay, we've got a 50-50 shot between cause and effect and continuous. I mentioned the sort of like earlier strategy of having a plug-in word or a plug-in phrase. So let's imagine we throw in a because of this into this blank. So we say reforestation efforts, while undeniably valuable, often result in forests with limited biodiversity. Because of this, care should be taken to plant a wide variety of native flora in depleted woodlands. That kind of checks out to me because the sort of suggestion here is, well, this is a danger that we face when we're reforesting forests. So because we know this, we should probably take care to, plant wide varieties. So in this case, we're going for accordingly. Um, so part of the process with this I kind of recommend is obviously the kind of relationship point is very helpful. A sort of additional step that would be also useful, at least for this question, is looking at those answer choices, making sure nothing is redundant, because if you have anything that's redundant in your answer choices, then that means that neither of them can be correct, because there's no reason to pick one over the other if they do the same thing.
I do have a question.
Yeah, what's up, Trayvon?
Uh, I could really make a strong argument for like it could be in continuous. So you just like give me a little more in depth explanation.
Yeah. So in this case, it kind of comes down to the cause and effect and continuous can feel pretty related. In this case, it's that this second sentence is a result of the first sentence. As a result of the danger of the limited biodiversity, we should take care to plant a wide variety of native flora. So the furthermore here, it's just that not really demonstrating that idea that sentence two is a result of sentence one. Does it help a little bit more kind of put that into
Yeah,
more
I,
specificity?
I get what you're saying.
Okay. So that's kind of, I guess, like cause and effect and continuous can kind of feel close, but it's more that cause and effect suggests that idea two wouldn't be possible without idea one. So it's like if there was not the danger of the limited biodiversity, there wouldn't really be a reason to take care to plant the wide variety of native flora. So that sort of thing. But it can be tricky to sometimes tell the difference for sure. Um, okay. But yeah, this is kind of like on the tougher side of the scale as far as this type of question goes. But we have a few more we can take a look at. So in
Thank
this
you.
case, we have the Gordie Howe hat trick, an unofficial statistic in which a hockey player scores a goal, records an assist, and gets in a fight all in the same game, is named after hockey great Gordie Howe. Blank. Howe only achieved this feat twice in his professional career, far fewer times than many other players. So give this one a read and let me know what you think the choice would be for this one. So another situation where we're working with two sentences we're trying to connect. Take another quick second to read through this and lock in your answer if you haven't already. All right. So in this case, we have sort of, I think the biggest tells here are this like far fewer and this only after kind of setting up like, oh, Gordie Howe did all this stuff. He gets in the fight all the times. He's like scoring a bunch of goals. He's recording assists. But then we have the second sentence is like, well, this only really happened twice. So gives contrast. And we most of us said however, so we're going for a however because idea two conflicts with idea one. But yeah, that's more or less what you're working with when you're looking at these transition word questions. This is like standalone, the smallest single category on the SAT. Some sections don't even feature it at all. But before we move into so there's a whole other kind of category I want to cover today with the rhetorical synthesis, the other smallest category. But before I move there, are there any questions about this this section or the way we got to any of these answers?
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up,
What's the
Parker?
answer for number 6 again?
Number six? Yeah, so this is accordingly. So for the reforestation question, it's because sentence two is because of sentence one. We have to take care of because of the limited biodiversity danger.
Okay.
Mhm. Um, I have a request in the chat to explain the last one. By last one, do we mean the Gordie Howe? So for the Gordie Howe question, so this first sentence sets up this idea of the Gordie Howe hat trick, right? In which a hockey player does all these things, scores a goal, records an assist, and gets in a fight, all in the same game, and it's named after hockey great Gordie Howe. This sort of suggests that this Gordie Howe person was like doing a bunch, like scoring a bunch of goals, recording a bunch of assists, and getting in fights like all the time, right? That this is sort of his signature thing. Sentence two says though that this only really happened twice. Like even though this is like a big thing that now he's kind of like memorialized for, it's only really something that happened twice, far fewer times than many other players. So in this case, the kind of first sentence suggests that this is something this guy did all the time. The second sentence confirms this only really happened like a few times. So sentence two conflicts with sentence one. And then, however, would give us the best thing. And I'm seeing a question in the chat that, however, and therefore, what's the difference between those two? Therefore is more of a continuous thing. You'd say this, this first idea I set up, like, oh, the Gordie Howe hat trick is this. And if, say, Howe had done this all the time, you'd say, oh, therefore it's named this because he did this all the time. Therefore is more of you're saying, like, you know, uh, is more of an and, more of a continuous kind of idea. Okay, any other quick questions about transition words, how we got to any of these answers? All right, cool. So that's pretty much what you're dealing with the transition word questions. So let's take a look at rhetorical synthesis. So what's interesting about these two types of questions, I mentioned like very, very first day, if you're able to join us then, that there's like 4 categories of questions that the College Board says exists. So transition words is under the expression of ideas section, and so is this rhetorical synthesis. I find that interesting. But this rhetorical synthesis, um, before I get too deep into like what's actually going on with these questions, I want to introduce this like 80-20 principle idea, basically speaking, that, you know, approximately 80% of outcomes come from 20% of causes. So the sort of recommendation with this kind of idea is that you really invest your energy and your time in the 20% of things that cause, whatever your 80% is. So, this is just kind of visualized, right? 20% of your effort equals 80% of results. So just want to show you what this question looks like. So when we're talking about rhetorical synthesis, this is what we're looking at, right? You see a bulleted list. The bulleted list has a bunch of kind of non-sequential pieces of information, right? There's a topic, but all these pieces of information are addressing different concepts, come with different numbers, kind of come from completely different places. And the sort of like the way they're introduced isn't really that specific. It just says researching a topic, right? And then we get all of this information that we have to somehow try to synthesize or understand ourselves. And then the question comes in a little bit later. The student wants to specify who may have first populated the Azores. According to the 2015 study, which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? And then in your answer choices, you see like all these different bullet points remixed in different ways, and you have to somehow figure out, okay, which of these does the goal that they're talking about and also agrees with all of the bullet points. And it's just kind of a lot to process and a lot to keep in mind. So, um, generally speaking, whenever you have a big passage, and just like in general in the SAT, but especially when you see those bullet points, I recommend zooming straight in on the question itself, aka the thing that comes right before your answer choices. Zoom straight in on that. In this case, this is a new question. In this case, the question asks, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two works. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So I introduced this sort of 80-20 principle earlier, and kind of where it comes into play here is that you only really need to process about 20% of these questions in order to actually arrive at the correct answer. And what I mean by that is, we see the question here, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two works. If that's all we know, we can just stop there. Okay, what am I trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to emphasize a similarity between the two works. Let's just pause on that and kind of hold on to that moving forward. Just like I mentioned, emphasize similarity. And then once you've really figured out, okay, what is the goal here? What is important about that goal? I'd say the important things about this goal are the similarity point. So whatever answer choice is correct must kind of, talk about ways in which things are similar. And then specifically between the two works, it must mention both of the works, or at least two specific works. So even without looking at the bulleted list, we can start to look at our answer choices and eliminate things that don't click with that. So let's say we're just looking at A. A says, Erasure 2008 uses discarded objects such as audio cassette tapes and magnets. Homegrown 2009, however, includes push pins, plastic plates, and forks and wood. The word however shows up. It's talking about differences between the two things. The first one does this thing with audio cassette tapes. The second thing does something with push pins. That sounds to me like we're talking about a difference. So I can eliminate A even before I've kind of cross-referenced it with the bulleted list. So let's look at C. So C says Tubbs's work, which often features discarded objects, has been shown both within the United States and abroad. So in this case, I mean, I guess it's kind of a similarity, but remember our goal up here wanted to specifically express a similarity between the two works, a specific pair of works. In this case, it's like really broad and it kind of mentions a similarity, but it doesn't sound like it's really emphasizing much. So we're not talking about two specific works in C, so we can eliminate it. And then we look at D. Okay, so Tubbs completed Erasure in 2008 and Homegrown in 2009. That's two different works, right? So it's doing the second part of the thing. It does talk about two specific works, but those are just different numbers, right? 2008, 2009, different. So we can eliminate D because it's not doing a similarity, which really just leaves us with B. Like many of Tubbs's sculptures, both Erasure and Homegrown include discarded objects. Erasure uses audio cassette tapes, and Homegrown uses plastic forks. So we have some, little signals about like what's giving us that similarity idea. We see like, that kind of compares two things. We see both, that kind of emphasizes that comparison. And then we do see two different works being mentioned, Erasure and Homegrown. And it's the only one that does that, which means that it's the answer. And notice, I didn't look at any of that bulleted list at all. I never actually had to read the list or confirm anything based on the list. All I had to do was figure out, okay, what is the question's goal? In this case, emphasize a similarity between the two works. And based on that goal alone, how can I look at my answer choices and work from there? In this case, and we get B because it is emphasizing similarity and it mentions two specific works. So I'm going to go to this next one and talk through this one as well, and then we'll try some more of them together. So same process. Let's say I completely skip the bulleted list and I zoom straight in on this first sentence in the question. The student wants to introduce the scientist and her field of study to a new audience. Okay, so I see the phrases introduce the scientist and her field of study. So the introduce, the verb is helpful, right? Okay, but the kind of extra helpful thing here is the phrase the scientist and her field of study. So any answer choice that only mentions the scientist or only mentions the field of study, I can eliminate because it's not doing, both. It's not doing all the things it needs to do. So let me look at A. A, located in Brazil, the Amazon reef is one of the largest known coral reefs in the world. Okay, that's not a scientist, so goodbye A, right? Let's look at D. As Camille Jasmine Gaines knows well, coral reefs are vital underwater ecosystems providing homes to thousands of species of fish. Sounds a little advanced, and this coral reefs, it doesn't really seem to introduce her, right? It seems it's kind of like mid-thought. Let's hold on to that for a second, though. C, providing homes to 25% of all marine species, including up to 8,000 species of fish. Coral reefs are vital underwater ecosystems and thus of great interest to marine biologists. This is also not talking about either a scientist or a field of study. So C is completely irrelevant to us. And then we have B, marine biologist Camille Jasmine Gaines studies coral reefs, vital underwater ecosystems that provide homes to 25% of all marine species. So both of these things mention a scientist and a field of study, but let's kind of lock in on the introduce and new audience point. Which of these two sounds like it's doing a better job of introducing the scientist to a new audience, specifically that side of the goal? I'm seeing mostly B's in the chat, and that's exactly correct in this case. Because it is doing the best job, well, both, it mentions the scientist and her field of study, right? Camille Jasmine Gaines studies coral reefs. And it's also doing the best job of kind of introducing her. My bad. If you look at D, it does mention her and it does mention like things that she studies, but it's a little bit too specific, and it doesn't really, introduce the ideas. Okay, so we're gonna do this one together. So same deal. You can completely ignore what's going on up here. Oh. And just go straight for your answer choices. The student wants to emphasize the unique advantages of Angora wool. Notice the word unique, advantages, and also Angora wool. So your answer choice has to specifically be speaking about Angora wool. express something positive about it. And the unique part seems also kind of relevant here. It has to be an advantage that is not alone Angora wool's thing. So we have A, Angora wool is a type of fiber commonly produced in China and often blended with other types of wool. B, Angora is known for its long, silky, and soft fibers and being less allergenic than sheep's wool. C, Angora is different from other types of wool because it comes from rabbits rather than sheep. And D, China produces most of the world's Angora wool, which is a type of fiber that is often used in clothing. So give those a read and let me know in the chat what your thoughts are so far. If it's more helpful for you for now, you can start with the process of elimination and work backwards. So start by eliminating choices you know aren't doing the thing that it's asking you to do, and then try to figure out what's left from there. But just take a few seconds, about a minute. So, I always recommend starting with the process of elimination. So I'm going to kind of just quickly like talk through what I would do in this situation. So looking at the answer choices, I want to talk about the unique advantages of Angora wool. I look at A, Angora wool is a type of fiber commonly produced in China and often blended with other types of wool. That doesn't sound like an advantage to me. That's just a description of what it is. It's a little bit too plain. So A is not an advantage. Let's look at D. China produces most of the world's Angora wool, which is a type of fiber that is often used in clothing. Sort of the same problem, right? Like it's just generally speaking about it. So D, that leaves with B and C. C says Angora is different from other types of wool because it comes from rabbits rather than sheep. So I do notice the word is different, which gets at the unique point, right? It is different from other types of wool. But to me, that doesn't really sound like an advantage. To merely say something is different than something else isn't necessarily say it's like better, right? So I'm going to kind of like softly eliminate C and then really think about B. So Angora is known for its long, silky, and soft fibers and for being less allergenic than sheep's wool. So it mentions something that, long, silky, and soft. That sounds kind of unique, I guess. But the kind of like real kicker for this one is the being less allergenic than sheep's wool. In this case, that actually sounds like an advantage to me. And it's unique because compared to sheep's wool, it is not allergenic. So B ends up being the answer to this one because it not only talks about Angora wool, but it also expresses something advantageous about it, and that makes it unique. So the kind of like, I guess, trouble with this one is once you get to B and C, if you want to go process elimination, C is saying something unique about it, but not necessarily advantageous. So sometimes you can get about 50% of the goal, but you need like 100% of the goal. So that's what gives us B over C. Okay. So let's look at some that are a bit more, I guess, chunky, a bit more complicated. Because this is kind of the level of thing you can expect with this type of question. They always kind of look like this. And generally on a section of the SAT, there'll be like 2 or 3 of these. So they're not like everywhere, but they show up enough. So same deal. We're going to cut straight to the question itself. This one says, the student wants to specify who may have first populated the Azores according to a 2015 study. So I'm going to kind of like emphasize certain things about this, just that what feels like important about the goal itself. So we have who, so a person, right? Person or people sounds like it's going to be a big deal here. We have this 2015 study, so whichever one would be correct in our answer choices, it's probably going to reference that somehow. And then, of course, we have the Azores point. So we're talking about people, we're talking about the Azores, we're talking about the 2015 study. So we look at our answer choices. We have A, in their 2015 study, the researchers found a genetic connection between house mice in the Azores and those in Scandinavia. B, historians have long believed that the first humans to populate the Azores, a group of islands about 870 miles off the coast of Portugal, arrived in the 15th century. C, according to a 2015 study, the first humans to populate the Azores may have been the Vikings from Scandinavia, not mariners from Portugal as previously believed. And D, Portuguese mariners may not have been the first humans to populate the Azores. So give this one a read and let me know in the chat which answer you're thinking is right. And as always, I kind of recommend cross-elimination. So feel free to start by, throwing out the ones you know are wrong and then finding the one you think is right. Take about 30-ish more seconds if you're still kind of reading through and processing it. And as a reminder, you don't actually need any of that. All right. Seeing pretty much straight C's in the chat. Awesome. So in this case, the kind of dead giveaway, right, is we have this according to a 2015 study. That's a big part of the goal, right? So anything in our answer choices that doesn't mention that study, we can immediately be like, okay, D, I don't care. Okay, B, I don't care. So then choosing between A and C in their 2015 study, this is A. In their 2015 study, the researchers found a genetic connection between house mice in the Azores and those in Scandinavia. It's like, okay, cool. So that's a 2015 study part, but that's not people, right? Um, we're not talking about house mice. So get rid of A. That leaves with C because it's talking about that study and it's talking about who, right? The people who populated the Azores. All right. Yeah, C. C for that one. All right. Let's look at this next one together. So, same deal. Cut straight to the question. The student wants to emphasize a similarity between Beards's invention and Jones's invention. So, kind of like that earlier sample question that was talking about similarity, right? Okay, that's a big deal here. The other big deal is the fact that it wants to mention both of these inventors. The correct answer has to do, both. So let's look at those choices. Remember, you don't need this. So we have A, Jones's mobile refrigeration system, which he invented in 1938, made it possible for food transport trucks to carry perishable foods farther. B, in 1897, Beard invented an automatic coupler, which made the job of connecting train cars safer. C, Beards's automatic coupler and Jones's mobile refrigeration system both improved on existing designs. And D, Beards's invention made the job of connecting train cars safer, whereas Jones's invention enabled food transport trucks to carry perishables further. Take a look at those answer choices and let me know which one you're feeling. Take just another quick second if you're still processing it. So for this one, similarity, right? And then we have two inventions we want to talk about. So just looking at A, right? It only talks about Jones, so that doesn't work. Looking at B, it only talks about Beard, so that doesn't work. So we have C and D. Those are talking about both people. C says Beard's automatic coupler and Jones's mobile refrigeration system both improved on existing designs. I like the word both when we're trying to talk about a similarity. So C ends up being the correct answer for this one. D mentions both of them, but connecting train cars safer and carry perishables farther, not the same thing. So C gives us a similarity and it talks about both. So let's look at another sample one here. So this one is asking, the student wants to describe how fabric is used in assertion of will. So specifically fabric and specifically in the piece assertion of will. Those are going to be pretty important. A, in assertion of will, the figure's clothing is made of fabric pieces stitched to the painting's canvas. B, depicting three standing clothed figures. Assertion of will is a painting by Simfue Ninsube. C, Simfue Nizube's assertion of will was one of 8 artworks exhibited in Oracles of the Pink Universe at the Denver Museum of Art. And D, the exhibition Oracles of the Pink Universe features artwork by artist Simfue Nizube. So give this one a read and let me know in the chat which answer you think gives you what you need. Okay, take a few more seconds to work on this one if you're still processing it. So saw most of the A's in the chat. For this one, you can tell D isn't talking about the work we're trying to talk about. C mentions it, but way too general, right? So then B, depicting three standing. We do have the word fabric, I guess cloth is kind of a fabric thing, but that's not really talking about the how point, right? So you're all correct. A gives us what we need because it talks about the work we're trying to talk about, and it specifically brings up the how point, right? How is the fabric used? Well, the fabric is stitched together, and the figures are clothed in it. So, A is the right one for that. So that's pretty much the extent of like what rhetorical synthesis this type of question is going to give you. Basically, like the main thing you need to know when you see that bulleted list, ignore it, cut straight to this first sentence of the question, and then really make sure you understand what goes on in the like after the student wants to make sure you really understand like that goal, and then once you figure out the goal, everything from there is just like, okay, let me just look at the answer choices, eliminate what's not doing the goal, and then choose the one that's closest to all the pieces of the goal. So whether that is being like, okay, this one specifically wants a similarity between these two inventions. If it doesn't mention those inventions, then I know I can eliminate it. If it's not about similarity, then I know I can eliminate it, etc., etc. That's pretty much how these ones work. Any quick questions about this type of question, rhetorical synthesis? Okay, so we pretty much got through everything I plan on getting through today. Tomorrow, Lily is going to work with everyone through a review, so you'll be able to go through kind of like practice sets of questions and all of the material we've covered so far. But because we're breaking a little early for today, I can also hang on the Zoom for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions about either standard English conventions, words in context, transition words, or rhetorical synthesis, the two we just covered, yeah, I can hang on until about 6. So feel free to linger in the Zoom and ask any questions you have. But other than that, that's pretty much all I have. If you haven't already, make sure you put your name in the chat for attendance. I can hang on for a few minutes if you have any questions. I do see a question in the chat from Maya. So if you are just joining us for the boot camp, this is kind of all the boot camp stuff. If you're taking the class with either me or Lily at the weekly class at Midwood, next week we'll actually do words and context again. We'll go a little bit deeper since we'll have kind of like that in-person experience, but we're actually doing words and context next time. So you'll have the opportunity to practice a bit more of that kind of context clue, finding situation. Yeah. So yeah, I can hang on for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions. But other than that, that's all I've got. Oh yeah, Trayvon. So all of the slides and info will be sent to you. And also, so all of these sessions were recorded, and they'll be available on YouTube you may have a link to that already. If not, you'll be getting it shortly. So you'll be getting the slides and all the YouTube videos to review whenever you'd like.
Excuse me, Mr. Tyler.
Yeah, what's up?
Are the slides going to be uploaded to Google Classroom, and are the videos going to be uploaded to YouTube?
Yes, so you'll be able to watch all the recordings of these sessions on YouTube, and then you'll be able to access all of the slides we used as well.
What's the name of the YouTube channel to access it?
Here, I can actually pull up the link and just send it to you real quick, or just put it in the chat.
Okay.
Just pulling it up. 1 second, sorry. Okay, so that's the YouTube. Yeah. And all the lessons from this week will be there, and also there's lessons from previous years, previous boot camps too. So if it's helpful to review things with multiple videos, there's a bunch of stuff on there also.